Hello and welcome to the Monday, November 10th, 2025 edition of the SANS Internet Storm Center's Stormcast. My name is Johannes Ulrich, recording today from Jacksonville, Florida. And this episode is brought to you by the SANS.edu Credit Certificate Program in Cybersecurity Engineering. Quick reminder from DDA today that our honeypots continuously are seeing a lot of attempts to download source code repositories from your web servers. This often happens sort of accidentally where these .git and directories like this are being made live as part of pushing a website live. So definitely be super careful about this. The attackers are constantly scanning for this. And when I'm talking about, for example, not embedding credentials and such in GitHub repositories, that question always comes up where, what if I keep my GitHub repository private? Well, it's private, but for how long? And all it takes is a small configuration mistake like this in order to leak not just your source code, but also possible secrets that you're keeping with your source code. So be super careful here and also proactively scan your web applications for any leaked directories like this. You can expect that it takes probably way less than a day for an attacker to find these files. And Socket has discovered an interesting set of new malicious .NET packages distributed via NuGet. There are a couple things that are really different and novel compared to some of the other malicious packages that we have talked about in the past. I think it was just last week or so that I mentioned that pretty much all of the attacks that we have seen so far were really heavily targeting crypto coin developers. Well, this one is different. It's going specifically after developers that are working with industrial control systems, in particular targeting, for example, a library related to Siemens PLCs. So one of the issues here is that the developer in question here who published these malicious packages did also publish some benign packages that work as advertised. Definitely something that someone may legitimately use. But then in addition, they also have published some malicious packages, the Sharp 7 Extend one, for example, specifically going after PLCs like these Siemens PLCs. And Sharp 7 is one of the APIs being used for these kind of PLCs. So Sharp 7 Extend, an extended version of that API, certainly something that a developer would be interested in. But this is not the only odd thing. The other odd thing is that there is a time delay built into the malicious code being activated. And that very heavily depends on the particular package being used here. Some of them will not activate the malicious code for years. And I think actually that's almost too long that they're waiting here. Obviously, the packages were discovered now before the malicious code activated. I think 2028 was sort of one of the start dates here for one of the particular packages. So that's, first of all, interesting that they wait that long. There are a couple where it starts faster, where it picks a random delay between 30 and 90 minutes. That also makes sense because that's probably long enough where a quick test inside a sandbox or so before you deploy the package will not find it. What's also interesting is that it directly affects the communication with the industrial control system. So there is no simple sort of money-making kind of motivation here. It's really more sabotage. And it's tricky insofar that once the malicious code activates, it does not have a 100% failure rate. Now, the failure rate is pretty large. It's sort of in the 80% range for some of these packages, but still it's not 100%, which of course could again make it more difficult to reproduce these issues and maybe make you more blame like a faulty device and such, and not necessarily faulty and malicious code. So really interesting, and I think that entire area of these attacks against developers, that's what we actually also had with the repositories I just talked about, and these malicious modules being published, it's just something that's getting sort of worse and worse by the day. And then we have an interesting attack developed by Microsoft in order to deduct what prompts a user is sending to an LLM via an encrypted channel like HTTPS. They call the attack Whisper Leak, and it reminds me of similar attacks that have been used against, for example, search engines. The trick here is that we are just looking at the size of the data being transmitted, in particular, sort of on a more granular scale, like looking at packet sizes in order to detect what the size of each chunk of data is that's being transmitted. And that apparently is somewhat related to the topic that the particular LLM is answering questions about. Interesting work, and I think I'm still a bit skeptical how much it scales and how really practically applicable it is. In sort of the more traditional world, it usually happens like in search engines where you sort of have these single page applications where a user with each character they type gets a certain response back. And then looking at the response coming back, you usually can basically deduct what letter the particular user typed. And that works in particular well if you have a limited set of questions that the user could ask. For example, in medical environments where they may be looking up the name of a drug or a disease, this is quite applicable. We'll have to see how applicable this really is here for LLMs, but it's an interesting attack and probably adding some noise. That's usually the answer for these types of attacks. Does make some sense here in order to make this kind of deduction of the content less successful. Well, and that's it for today. So thanks for listening. Thanks for liking. Thanks for subscribing to this podcast. And thanks for leaving good comments at your favorite podcast app. And talk to you again tomorrow. Bye.